The sun had not yet cleared the edge of the escarpment when the leopard found its perch. It was an old male, scarred, lean, and patient, the kind of animal that moved like part of the terrain itself. He had climbed silently through underbrush, still wet from the night's condensation, and padded across a thin animal trail that coiled around the upper rock faces. The spot he chose was narrow, just wide enough to sit, high enough to see. But this morning, the leopard wasn't hunting. He had paused, not for movement in the trees or the scent of prey, but for something else, something deeper, sensed through claw and bone. Below him stretched a vast, steep valley, carved by centuries of seasonal rains and wind. Across from his ledge, a slope lined with dry brush and scattered rocks seemed still, silent, solid. Yet the leopard stared at it intently. There had been a sound earlier, not a loud one, more a shift, a granular murmur beneath the crust of the cliff. He felt it through his paws, not his ears. And now he watched. Far beneath, the forest canopy moved in gentle patterns, the wind behaving normally, insects rising in columns. But something in the cat's instinct warned that the pattern had changed. He flattened his ears briefly, blinking once. The silence up here was too still. No birds had passed overhead in the last 20 minutes. No monkeys screeched from their usual trail along the ridge. The leopard shifted slightly and lowered himself to his belly. His yellow eyes, ringed with black markings, didn't blink now. They were fixed entirely on a narrow section of cliff across the gorge, just below a craggy outcrop. A fault line, invisible to human eyes, but traced in scent and dust by those who live in stillness. There were no alarms, no vibrations powerful enough to register yet. But the leopard knew. He did not move. He simply waited. And far below, the ground had already begun to listen back. At the ranger station down in the valley, Mira adjusted the sensitivity threshold on the slope monitors. Nothing in the data suggested urgency, just minor soil settling. The system readouts showed soft pulses like a heartbeat in sleep. Still, something didn't feel right. She leaned closer to the screen showing a slow-feed camera mounted halfway up the cliff face. The image was still, almost serene. But Mira had worked this range for 5 seasons. She knew how quiet the mountain could get just before it changed. The upper slope had been dry too long. No major storms, but a long stretch of wind and uneven moisture. Perfect conditions for subtle breakdowns in fractured rock. Deep within the face, layers of shale and compressed sediment, once stable, could shift without announcement. She clicked through archived images from earlier in the week. In one frame, a ledge that had looked solid now seemed slightly hollowed underneath. Could be shadow, could be nothing. But there was a faint line, not a crack exactly, more like a drawn thread, reaching from the base of a boulder downward. A thread that hadn't been there before. She toggled to the automated warning log. No pings. The data lagged behind real-time events by a few minutes, and most changes fell under the false positive threshold anyway. That was always the risk. Overreact, and you waste days of work and public funding. Wait too long, and something breaks. She rubbed the back of her neck and leaned back. On the wall behind her, a corkboard held pinned photos from the last controlled rockfall survey. Clean collapses, predictable physics, but nature rarely repeated herself, especially not up here. These cliffs were ancient and unreadable, like language carved in stone and slowly buried again. She tapped her pen against the desk. A small movement caught her eye on the live feed. Not on the cliff, on the upper ridge, far to the left. Something low, feline, and motionless. A leopard. Mira zoomed in. It wasn't hunting. It was just watching. She didn't know it yet, but the animal's gaze was pointed directly at the fault line she couldn't yet measure. By midday, the heat along the cliff face began to rise. The rocks breathed it out slowly, like something tired but restless. Insects moved sluggishly in the dry air, and no birds circled the upper thermals. The leopard hadn't moved for almost 2 hours. His body remained still, but his ears turned occasionally, tracking sounds the wind buried. Nothing about his posture suggested relaxation. It was alert silence, practiced and ancient. Below him, halfway down the slope, something shifted. Not dramatically, just a minute crumble, a twitch of debris where dust broke free from a seam and spilled in a thin line. It would have gone unnoticed by any human eye, even a camera's. But the leopard blinked once and adjusted his paw slightly. He was now no longer just observing. He was calculating. Far beneath, the crack Mira had noticed in the feed had lengthened, though imperceptibly. The soil above it held its shape, but tension built beneath, a weight balanced on pressure and time. Years of gradual erosion had hollowed out small cavities in the cliff's internal layers, invisible on the surface. Water had moved through unseen fractures during last season's rains, softening the sediment, weakening what had once been stable. Now, gravity did its work in silence. Mir had taken a break from the monitor feed, stepping outside to make a call to the district geologist. "It's probably nothing," she said, "but I want a drone pass to image the southeast cliff edge, just to be thorough." The geologist agreed. They'd scheduled worse calls over less. While she waited, she glanced up at the ridge itself, too distant to make out detail. Somewhere up there, beyond her view, the leopard still stared down the slope, unmoving. A breeze picked up, and with it, another slow shift. A line of fine dust rolled like mist across the rocks and vanished into a dry channel. Then silence again. Tighter this time. Held breath. And on the ledge, the leopard slowly stood. He turned his head not toward the slope, but slightly to the side, toward the wind. It was the sound beneath the silence that stirred him now. Something was no longer still. The first true sign didn't come from data. It came from absence. The ridge went completely silent. No cicadas, no crickets. Not even wind in the thorn trees. Mira, back at her station, felt it before she understood it. The kind of quiet that builds pressure in the chest. She returned to the slope monitor and noticed something strange. The motion sensors were registering sporadic pulses, too faint to trigger an alert, but steady enough to feel like a rhythm. The type of signal that didn't match animal movement or weather. It was internal, ground-borne. She opened the real-time soil pressure overlays. Readings remained within range, nothing to act on. But instinct crept in. She clicked over to the cliff cam again and zoomed in toward the high ledge. The leopard was gone. A bad sign. Rangers often joked that animals knew more than sensors, that if the monkeys screamed, something was coming. But this was different. The cat had been watching a static cliff for hours, then vanished just as the pressure started fluctuating. Mira felt something tighten behind her ribs. She grabbed the radio. "Unit 3, what's your position?" A man's voice crackled back. "West Trail. About 500 meters below the southern ridge. Stable so far." "Why?" Mira hesitated. "We might have micro-shift activity on the east-facing cliff. No full alert yet, but I want visuals if possible." "Copy. Moving upslope now." As the patrol jeep climbed slowly, one of the rangers pointed ahead. "You see that?" Along the cliff wall, just above a dry drainage channel, a curl of dust lifted upward, light, ghost-like, like steam from hot rock. Not windblown. It rose vertically for several seconds, then faded. The driver stopped. Mira watched from the station, eyes on both the camera feed and the data dashboard. Then it happened. A faint tremor. Just one. A half-second vibration. Not enough to shake a cup on the table, but enough to loosen a fracture line. The pressure values on her monitor dipped, then jumped, only by decimal points, but in sequence. Mira sat up straight and slammed her hand onto the emergency log key. "Pull back now. Get off that approach. Something's moving." The ranger didn't question. He reversed the jeep fast, tires sliding slightly on the loose gravel. Then a sound came, not explosive, not cracking, more like a long exhale through stone. Deep, low, wide. And above the abandoned ledge, the first rocks began to fall. The dust plume that rose from the slope wasn't wide, but it was fast, unnaturally fast for a cliff known to change slowly. Mira watched in disbelief as the southern shelf, The one no drone had mapped recently began to deform in real time. On the camera feed, a slab near the top pulled away by less than a meter, a motion so small it might have looked like a trick of the light, until the rock beneath it gave out. No sound reached the valley yet, but the image told everything. Mira hit the emergency protocol. Sirens blared through the ranger station as system alerts caught up with what the mountain had already decided. A chain reaction began. First, a cloud of gravel fell like a gray waterfall down the face, followed by two larger stones bouncing in uneven rhythms. Then a groaning, a true groan, seismic in texture, not in volume, as if the slope itself were rotating under stress. The rangers, now a safe distance below, stopped the jeep and stared upward. In the valley town 2 kilometers away, no one had felt a quake, but in the gorge, pressure shifted like muscle flexing beneath skin. The fault line Mira had flagged, previously ignored in geological surveys, now bled dust and began tearing open. Vegetation at the edge of the ledge quivered, roots suddenly unsupported. A tree tilted. It held for 3 seconds. Then it dropped. The echo of its fall bounced between the walls like thunder caught in a jar. A portion of the shelf, the width of 2 trucks, maybe more, finally broke free. Not in a single slide, but in sheets, like pages torn from the earth. They fell diagonally, skipping across outcroppings, exploding into rock dust, before slamming into the lower ridge with a sound so deep it vibrated through rib cages. The force sent air whipping down the valley, strong enough to rattle the station's outer shutters. Mira didn't move. She watched until it ended. When the dust settled, a new scar marked the cliff, raw and orange beneath the gray. Several meters of trail had vanished, but no one had been hurt. No patrol was in the fall zone, and all of it had unfolded within minutes of the Leopard walking away. The air still tasted like stone. Mira stood outside the station now, boots sinking into the dry earth, watching the last curls of dust drift down the valley. The cliff was no longer whole. From the base of the fall to where the ledge had once jutted proudly, the slope now looked broken, unfamiliar. A reminder that the land was never static, only waiting. She replayed the last 2 hours in her head, step by step. The silent monitor warnings. The Leopard's sudden departure. The camera catching the early dust drift. The slight tremor. Every clue had been small, too small on its own. But together they spoke a language not all rangers could read. Instinct stitched with observation. The radio crackled. Station, this is Unit 3. Confirming visual on the collapse zone. No casualties. We stopped 20 meters from where the trail broke. Mira exhaled hard and pressed the call button. Copy that. Pull back to camp and stay clear. Ground might still be unstable. She stepped back inside and logged the event. Category: localized landslide. Cause: cliff destabilization due to sediment fracture. But under notes, she wrote something else. Leopard behavior shift observed prior to slope failure. Potential early biological indicator. Later, she would forward that to the geologist. As the sun dipped low, she replayed the camera footage again. Frame by frame, the Leopard had watched that exact section of cliff for nearly 2 hours without moving. Not distracted, not hunting, just waiting. Then, seconds before the pressure dipped and the first stone fell, it rose, turned, and vanished over the ridge. Was it scent? Vibration? A frequency too low for human ears? She didn't know. But what she did know, what she was certain of, was that the cliff hadn't failed until the Leopard walked away. The evening sky over the valley turned to gold, then ash. Shadows stretched long from the cliffs, hiding the scar like a bandage pulled tight. Birds finally returned to the ridge, cautious and distant. A single hawk circled once, then veered west. Mira stood alone beside the observation point, arms crossed, a thermos in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. The collapsed shelf was visible even now, a raw, open wound in the land. To anyone else, it looked like aftermath. To Mira, it looked like a message. She uploaded the event data to the Geological Center. The logs, pressure charts, and before and after imagery were clean. The anomaly in the early readings might get flagged. The system would call it minor instability, but it wouldn't mention the leopard. And yet, that image remained burned into her memory. The stillness of the cat, the way it had watched the fault line, unmoving, as though it understood something. What if this wasn't coincidence? Over the past year, Mira had documented other events. Animals behaving oddly hours before ground shifts, birds vacating canopies before lightning storms, wolves howling toward empty skies before wind shear. Observations, dismissed patterns. Nothing statistically solid, but they were starting to align. Nature didn't always warn with thunder. Sometimes it whispered through fur and instinct. Later that week, a new research note would circulate quietly through the field teams. Behavioral anomalies in local predators may offer early indicators of seismic micro-events. Field observation remains critical. But on this night, Mira simply watched the ridge, and as dusk swallowed the cliffs, she caught sight of movement. Far up, barely visible in the growing dark, a figure reappeared. Low, smooth, deliberate. The leopard. It moved along the crest, then paused. For a moment it turned and looked down the slope, toward her, toward the scar, and then it vanished into the trees. The mountain, once again, was quiet. But Mira knew now. Something had been watching it longer than she had. Something that listened to the tremors no sensor could hear. Something older than data. She capped the thermos and went back inside,